I knew it. I knew she would inspire us all. I have one kind of boring slide, but I have only one slide, so I just want to just briefly tell you what the story is here. We are basically telling you that changes are so significant in the world, and we believe that these changes are really reflecting very well in this slide in a way. We say Uber, for instance, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles. Facebook, the world's most popular media owner, creates no content. Alibaba, the most valuable retailer, has no inventory. Airbnb, the world's largest accommodation provider, owns no real estate. And Blue Apron, the web-only seller of make-at-home meals, is the fastest growing merchant in the internet retail. It shows us how significant the changes are and the opportunities also that come with that. Now we are to a point where we have the first foreign speaker, which is The Future of Now, Sarah. Great title. Sarah Smith from the Institute for the Future.
Can you all hear me okay?
Podium is yours.
All right, I should have some slides coming up here. Have the clicker. Thank you. Beautiful. All right, so my name is Sarah. I'm a researcher at the Institute for the Future's Food Futures Lab. And we are a 48-year-old nonprofit based in Palo Alto, California, right in the heart of Silicon Valley's food innovation scene. And one of the reasons why I love thinking about the future of food is because each time we gather around the table, we honor the past, we experience the present, and we prepare for the future. Food is such an immediate personal future for everybody, for what your next meal is, but it is also so clearly linked to so many of the other giant systems and big challenges that we're facing in the world. So our work at Institute for the Future is really about three main things. We focus on sensing change. We do a lot of ethnography, we do a lot of signal scanning and connecting with small and local entrepreneurs to understand where we see change happening on the fringes. Then we translate that into communicating vision, and we create maps like the one that you see there to kind of show these complex systems and the future possibilities that they might enable for us. And then finally, we focus on building capacity. So we really, all of our work, all of the foresight that we're developing, we hope that it is used to take better actions in the present. And our newest report, which is out, is around food innovation recipes for the next decade. And I have a few copies of it with me. I'd be happy to share with you after my talk today. Today I'm going to focus on a few of our forecasts about how we might eat and how we might produce food in the next 10 years. So these are just a few kind of possibilities, provocations about what the future of food might look like. And of course, there are kind of unlimited possibilities, and that's why we are all here today to think about those. So this first one around how we might eat food in 2026. This is a forecast about moving toward more personalized and more immersive eating experiences. So how many people here have ever had the pleasure of tasting Cinnamon Toast Crunch? All right, delicious cereal. I'll be the first to admit that I love it. But when you think about some of the problems in our food system, a bowl of really sugary cereal marketed to kids for that first meal of the day kind of sums up a lot of the big challenges that we're facing. So as I research food innovation, I get excited when I hear about some of these big food companies working on innovation. And recently, General Mills, the maker of Cinnamon Toast Crunch, came out with a new product that is hoping to kind of address some of the key challenges of one of their demographics. They made a selfie spoon. They say, selfies and cereal together at last. You see all these lovely people really happy eating their cereal in the morning. But I think things like this are why food innovation kind of gets a bad rep sometimes, or why food and technology are often seen at odds with one another, that it's easy to be cynical about kind of food innovation when it comes out like this. Food and technology are undoubtedly merging. This is why people play games like this where everyone stacks their phone in the middle of the table and the first person to touch their phone has to pay the bill. But rather than just assuming that technology will be a barrier to our food experiences, I think we have a really unique opportunity to think about ways that technology could merge with food and create totally new experiences, from using synthetic biology to using virtual reality, It just totally opens up the range of possibilities for what our eating experiences might be like in the next decade. So one way that we show what these future possibilities might be are by creating what we call artifacts from the future. So artifacts from the past, an archaeologist might find an object and be able to really tell a lot about a society based on an object that you find there. You can kind of construct what rituals happened around it or what the society did with that object. So we use artifacts from the future to kind of pre-construct what life might be like. We use these images to really make some of our forecasts more concrete and give you a sense of what it might feel like to live in one of these possible futures. So when we were thinking about an artifact from the future for the future of eating, we were thinking about satisfaction. So we started with what is typically one of the least satisfying meals that you have, which is on an airplane. No offense to Icelandair. And we imagined, what if in 2026 you're going to book a flight and say Icelandair offers you a new perk. It's a virtual reality in-flight dining experience. So you strap on this headset, and you select beach mode, and all of a sudden, this cramped airplane that you're in is totally transformed into this beach experience, and there's some scent coming in, and it's just like this whole immersive sensory experience of food. So sometimes we make artifacts from the future, and they become reality shockingly quickly. Just this past year, Marriott Hotels announced that they're doing VR tourism, and not surprisingly, 3 out of the, I think, 5 destinations that they offer in their VR tourism have to do with food. You're going to visit a food producer or a food shop. Similarly, Airbus put a patent on an in-flight VR headset. So maybe this future is a little closer than we think. But of course, to really get that full experience, you would need to kind of hack some of our other senses too. So there's been some interesting studies out of Cornell University showing how the noise level around you affects your perception of taste. So it turns out on airplanes where there's a lot of noise in the background, our perception of umami flavors is actually boosted, and our perception of sweet taste is suppressed. So we can start to think about all the pieces that we can be designing for in a food experience. Uh-oh. Can we go to the next slide, please? Finally, at Heston Blumenthal's restaurant in London, one of his famous dishes is the Sounds of the Sea. And the dish comes out and it looks like there's some sea foam and some kind of fake sand, but it's served with this shell with an iPod inside that actually plays the sounds of the sea while you're eating the dish. And this might sound kind of like a fun, novel experience for an expensive meal, but it's based on research out of Oxford's Cross-Modal Research Lab, which studies this complex relationship between all 5 of our senses. And they're really trying to understand how can you use that relationship between the 5 senses to really enhance the dining experience. And recently, their research director had this great quote of, what if we could reposition our smartphones from a technology of distraction to one that lets us digitally season our food and create a new experience, just by adding some sound or some other element into the dining experience. So this is an artifact that's very technology focused. And if it evokes a similar reaction to the selfie spoon, I think that's valid. I think you could ask why. Why not just make airplane food taste better? And strap a virtual reality headset on. But I think before we dismiss this as a totally novel technology, it's worth thinking about what are some of the other opportunities that virtual reality could play in a dining experience. How could we create a really immersive experience for kids to get engaged and maybe make a fun game out of eating healthier foods? Or how could we use it for people who are aging and maybe homebound and who can't go on exotic traveling adventures but could still go and have an authentic and interesting food adventure through virtual reality? At Institute for the Future, we often talk about human-centered futures. Not just understanding the technologies, but really thinking about how people, with all of our complicated intentions and emotions, will adapt those technologies and integrate them into our lives. And I think as eaters, we all have pretty high aspirations for our human health, for the health of our planet, but it's really hard to always understand how your individual choices as an eater really scale up to impact that bigger system. I love this quote from the novelist and farmer Wendell Berry. And he says, eating is inescapably an agricultural act. How we eat determines how the world is used. I think more and more people, as we talk about this generation who is really thinking about food as a core part of their identity, are taking this mindset of understanding that what we eat really determines how this world functions. So the next short forecasts I'm going to share with you are some new possibilities for how we might produce food in 2026. And this is about moving toward more decentralized and more participatory food production. So just last week in Wired UK, there was this headline, "Will open source farming topple agribusiness giants?" This is Caleb Harper. He's at MIT, and he's been running a lot of their open agriculture farming initiatives. And he makes this awesome thing, which they've started calling a personal food computer. And so this is an open source kit that you can buy or build yourself, and then it's connected to the cloud, and you can download what they call climate recipes for different types of food that you would want to grow. And there's this whole community of people growing up of kind of exchanging, figuring out the exact right levels of humidity and temperature and light, and then sharing those with each other to create this kind of network of people who are interested in small-scale precision agriculture. We're also seeing this in new technology merging with really old and beautiful food traditions. So this guy on the left here is named Andrea Bezzecchi. He's a third-generation balsamic vinegar producer in Reggio Emilia. And on the left, you see him with his family's barrels. They're hundreds of years old. But on the right is this kit that he's making. And he's been working with the local Fab Lab in Reggio Emilia to get access to 3D printing tools. And he made this aerator, and he made an Arduino-powered pH sensor. And then he took a little sample of bacteria from his family's barrels, and he made it into this kit that you can buy on Kickstarter. He's putting it on Kickstarter, so that you can start making vinegar at home. And so he's trying to open up knowledge about the process of his food to more and more people, so that while it won't take the place of the old and traditional ways that he's made food, it opens up participation to new people. And then finally, so much of food production is about process. And there are a number of interesting projects looking at sharing the food process. And this was a project called Underground Meats, and it was an open source guide for food safety. So there was a group who was working on making a small meat startup, or meat salami company, and they were having a lot of trouble figuring out, as a small company, how to comply with all of the different regulations and safety standards that they had to meet. And so they decided to document that and share it in a really open and easy, accessible way. And it's now open. You can download it under a Creative Commons license, and they're really hoping to spread, in this spirit of open source, kind of as part of this maker movement, spread that knowledge and make food production more accessible. So speaking of meat, I'm going to end with one other artifact from the future that imagines if you were to walk into a butcher shop in 2026. It might look kind of familiar until you start to really look at the labels. And then you might start to see some unfamiliar things. So we're going to walk through the butcher case quickly here. The first is the in vitro lab-grown meat, which has been kind of a big buzz for the last couple years about how we could use synthetic biology to produce meat. And just in the last year, we've seen almost half a dozen companies in the Bay Area alone actually putting products into the market with this, making eggs, making milk, making pork, using a process that genetically modifies yeast to produce the proteins of those things. And so we're really closely tracking consumer acceptance of this kind of technology. Because even some vegans are kind of praising it as a great alternative to traditional meat production. But the counter-argument to it is that it's using the same mentality, the same mindset that kind of got us to where we are today. That if we just apply more technology to the problem, that we'll sort of be able to produce our way out of it. And so in response to that, there are groups pioneering what's called holistic land management. And rather than kind of fencing off cows to one side and fencing off grasslands for preservation, it's bringing the two together and letting the cows trample on the grass and poop on it and do the natural cycles of how cows and grass normally live together, which actually can help prevent desertification that's happening in many parts of the world. But the meat that comes from cows like that is not a $1 hamburger. And there was this great piece in the New Yorker earlier this year where Michael Spector asks, have a great quote from him. In order for that to change, America's agricultural priorities will need to fall in line with its health priorities. And I think this is an issue kind of worldwide, and as we're here thinking about the future of food in Iceland and the future of food around the world, how do we make sure that the priorities that we're setting for our food production systems are also in line with the priorities we have for our human health and our social systems? So there's one other group who's advocating a slightly different approach to making their meat consumption less harmful to the environment. And this is a real website called Eat the Invaders. And it's a group of enthusiasts who are trying to promote eating invasive species. So you can go on here and get guides about how to get some, in this case, feral hog for your dinner. But this is part of a movement of kind of changing perception of what's acceptable to eat. And the ugly fruit movement has taken off in a really interesting way. This is images from the French supermarkets campaign encouraging people to eat ugly fruit. Because we kind of had this aesthetic perfection standard with the fruit that we eat that ends up with so much of it getting thrown away. The UN recently said that if food waste were a nation, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So a lot of people are focusing on how do we reduce the amount of food that just purely goes wasted. And in response to this, a lot of really interesting things are popping up. Dan Barber, the chef at Blue Hill in New York, recently hosted a pop-up restaurant called Wasted, where all of the food that they served was made from parts of food that normally gets thrown out in a restaurant kitchen, the stems of broccoli and stuff like that. And he says the challenge is to create something truly delicious out of what we would otherwise throw away. And so I'd love that this event is in conjunction with the Food and Fun Festival, that there really is an amazing role for chefs to play in shaping the tastes and shaping the kind of expectations of food over the next decade. So I'm going to return to the selfie spoon for just a minute and give General Mills and give all of these big food companies a chance to recover from this. And I work with many of them, so I'm not no way bashing them. But I think that in the past year, we've seen so many food companies start, venture capital firms, start investing in small food companies. And there's this, as it says, the venture capital craze in food right now. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of attention being put into changing our food system. And everyone here in this room has a stake in it. We're all eaters. So I would like to challenge us to be better than selfie spoons, and that as we look to the next decade and make amazing new products and services that could change our food system, to really make a food system that we all want to live and eat in. Thank you.